Esteemed guests, please welcome President Lee C. Bollinger and the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia, His Excellency Nikol Pashinyan.
Welcome to the World Leaders Forum. I'd like to begin by recognizing a few people. Of course, the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, and the Prime Minister's spouse, Anna Hakobyan. Members of the Armenian delegation that are here with us today, and then our moderator, Alexander Cooley, the director of the Harriman Institute, and the Claire Tao Professor of Political Science at Barnard. We also have our co-sponsors, Columbia's Harriman Institute and the Department of Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies, and the many students and faculty who are here with us today. So before I begin, I would like to mention Columbia's Armenian Studies program, as well as the critical public health work that our medical center has been doing in the country for more than 3 decades now. So every fall we look forward to the meetings of the UN General Assembly, which brings many heads of state and government to New York City and then to our campus. Already we have heard from the UN Secretary General's envoy on youth, the Chancellor of Austria, and Queen Mathilde of the Belgians. Later this week, we will listen to the presidents of Iraq, Rwanda, and Georgia. Our guest this afternoon, Nikol Pashinyan of Armenia, the Prime Minister, is an extraordinary person. His story, his formative years as a journalist, and his rise to the Armenian premiership is one of struggle, persistence, and grit. Born and raised in a small city 2 hours north of the capital, the Prime Minister became politically active at a very young age, organizing protests and railing against corruption of those in power. He went on to study journalism and worked as a reporter and editor before founding his own newspaper. He became known for his strong beliefs and distaste for strongmen politicians. He organized demonstrations against the presidential elections in 2008, and when protests turned violent, the government blamed him and sent him to prison. He was granted amnesty several years later. He reemerged and was elected to the National Assembly in 2012 and 2017. In the spring of 2018, incensed at the ruling party's plan to circumvent term limits, he began a walk across the country in protest. He used social media to communicate with his supporters, and when he reached the capital, he was greeted by throngs of people. Their numbers soon swelled, blocking traffic and bringing the city to a standstill. In homage to Václav Havel, he named the movement the Velvet Revolution and directed participants to engage in nonviolent legal acts of civil disobedience. Several weeks after the mass protests began, the president resigned, and Parliament elected Mr. Pashinyan to the post of acting prime minister. The news was covered by outlets across the world. The mood in the country had shifted and people were euphoric. 7 months later, he solidified that victory in transparent national elections, the fairest in Armenia's history. A year later, the country is still in transition. A third of the population lives below the poverty line and unemployment is very high. 2 of Armenia's borders remain closed, the result of long-standing and deeply divisive disputes with neighboring Azerbaijan and Turkey. The Prime Minister has prioritized domestic concerns, concentrating on job growth, economic stability, and combating government corruption. He is also focused on critical foreign policy issues, like Armenia's close ties with Russia and the balance it must strike between honoring that alliance and building stronger relationships with the West. Critics of the Prime Minister contend that the momentum that brought him to power won't translate into effective political leadership, that his lack of extensive executive branch experience is a liability. But there is one thing everybody agrees on. He has transformed the country in ways once thought impossible. Armenians are optimistic about their future, about their ability to bring about political change through political engagement. For the first time, they believe that they have a real stake in their governance of their country and the power to influence the course of its future. The Prime Minister has come to Columbia today to give his first major address at an American university. He will speak about his approach to government reform and regional security, as well as his work with the UN on sustainable development, human rights, and poverty. Please join me in welcoming him to the podium.
Thank you. President Bollinger, dear students, members of academia, thank you very much for your very warm introduction. I am truly delighted and inspired to be here today and to experience the extraordinary environment of this top university that stimulates learning, academic excellence, and independent thinking. Columbia University carries a special meaning for the Armenians who have had a presence of this campus for over a century. I would like to extend special thanks to President Bollinger for the invitation to visit the university and for the opportunity to make my humble contribution to the extensive and proud history of the very strong bonds that Armenians and Columbia University share, which include many distinguished faculty members and students that have come through the campus. The Armenian Center has an important role to play in supporting Columbia's mission as a global university through dialogue and collaboration, and I am happy that Armenia stands as a partner in this process. Education and universities play a crucial role in training the youth for leadership, for driving social change and transforming our world towards a better tomorrow. Education is indispensable in preserving and promoting fundamental values of freedom, tolerance, and mutual respect. In a world where messages of exclusion and inequalities seem to be on the rise, upholding these values are making them work is as relevant as ever. To reverse the global decline in the democratic values and this rise of the authoritarian trends, the world needs positive examples of inclusiveness and progress, and here is where Armenia, I think, has an important story to share. In spring last year, Armenia came into the spotlight of international media as massive street protests transformed into a peaceful revolution, culminating in a non-violent transfer of power and a profound transformation of Armenia's political landscape. The Velvet Revolution set our country on a path of democracy through a process that was described by the UN Secretary General as a fantastic example of a peaceful transfer of power. It was a strictly homegrown process stemming exclusively from the demands and aspirations of the Armenian people. It had nothing to do with geopolitics or democracy promotion of external actors. The Armenian Velvet Revolution demonstrated that democracy and human rights continue to be universal values despite widespread ideas of cultural relativism and decline of democracies. The revolution in Armenia was driven by a strong demand for fundamental changes. People in Armenia wanted to have an efficient and competent government able to fight against corruption, to put an end to the electoral manipulations, fraud and clientelism in politics, to eliminate inequality and economic polarization existing in our society for many years, to establish level playing field and to provide equal opportunities for everyone. Since its very first day in office, the new Armenian government, formed as a result of the first uncontested parliamentary election in the past 25 years, has embarked on the implementation of an ambitious reform agenda. Comprehensive reforms, these are the most correct words describing the spirit of today's Armenia. Reforms are implemented in many areas, influencing almost all fundamental aspects of our life. A democratic society with a strong middle class based on the rule of law and accountable government is the ultimate goal of our reforms. To reach this goal, we need to develop inclusive political and economic institutions. We have achieved progress in many areas. Today, Armenia is truly a democratic country with established freedom of press and assembly. The chapter of electoral fraud and systemic corruption is closed in our country forever. Yet, the lack of independent judiciary is still a big issue in Armenia. Unfortunately, among the different branches of power, the judiciary enjoys the lowest level of confidence in our society. It is not accidental, therefore, that while making our steps toward establishing a really independent and efficient judicial system and restoring the integrity of our courts, we are encountering the stiff resistance from those who were exercising unrestricted control over judiciary before revolution. They understand that as a result of the successful judiciary reforms, they will lose their last stronghold and the hopes for the restoration of their political influence in Armenia. Those hopes are nothing but illusions, which we have incrementally dismantled in each stage of revolution. With the judiciary reform, we will consolidate the revolution and bring real change for our citizens and trust to the judiciary. Ladies and gentlemen, as I previously said, there was no geopolitical background in the Armenian Revolution. Armenia didn't produce any U-turns in the foreign policy. That is not to say that democracy did not strengthen Armenia's position in the international affairs and did not enrich our foreign policy with important values, principles, and interests. I am confident that the reform agenda shaped by the revolution opens up new prospects and opportunities for cooperation with our partners. In particular, it creates a solid ground for the development and enhancement of bilateral relations with the United States. We have a lot of achievement in this field, including the recently established US-Armenia strategic dialogue. However, we believe that today there there exists necessary prerequisites to go further in expanding the bilateral agenda. The US-Armenian relations have deep historic roots. Our people remember with appreciation the tremendous political and material support received from the US government and the US philanthropic community during and after the First World War. It was in response to the Armenian genocide perpetrated in the Ottoman Empire that the United States government founded the Near East Relief Organization, which officially became the first American philanthropic effort created exclusively to provide humanitarian assistance to the Armenian nation. Massive fundraising campaigns rescued 132,000 Armenian orphans and hundreds of thousands of refugees. In 1991, the US stood by Armenians and their newly established independent state once again. Today, the US-Armenian friendship is anchored in the shared values and in the ultimate respect for human rights, democracy, and dignity of the people. I also believe that the vibrant and active Armenian-American community is a significant factor contributing to our partnership. We take a great deal of pride in Armenian Americans who, having attained impressive heights in business, science, art, literature, entertainment, and other fields, also preserve strong interest and support to the ancestral homeland. Ladies and gentlemen, over the past decades, Armenia and the United States have been working together in many areas, including global security, fight against international terrorism, non-proliferation, nuclear security, and peacekeeping operation. Today, Armenia, with its 131 strong peacekeeping troops, is the second largest non-NATO member nation contributing to the operation in Afghanistan. Furthermore, Armenia is one of the contributors to the NATO-led operation in Kosovo. Previously, we also participated in the US-led coalition's operation in Iraq. We also attach great importance to the constructive role played by the United States as one of the co-chairs of the OSCE Minsk Group and appreciate its effort towards a lasting and durable peaceful resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Dear friends, unfortunately, the South Caucasus remains to be a volatile region marked by a number of security risks. Unresolved Nagorno-Karabakh conflict poses a security challenge to our nation and serves a serious impediment for regional development. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is among the most difficult and protracted ones in the world. It starts with Soviet Union, when an Armenian region with more than 90% of Armenian population was assigned by an arbitrary decision of Communist Party to Azerbaijan. It lived with the Soviet Union for 70 years, manifested by systematic and violent discriminations against the Armenian population, who formulated their bid for self-determination and human rights in 1988, even before the fall of the Berlin Wall. It survived the Soviet Union and turned into a large-scale war in the beginning of the 1990s, which threatened the very existence of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, who were subjected to mass atrocities. Since 1994, when a ceasefire agreement was signed between Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan and Armenia, the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process became an indispensable part of regional politics. There can be many hypotheses as to why it was not possible to resolve the conflict for more than 2 decades. The lack of functional democracy has been among them. It seems that there was a vicious circle wherein the people of the region were often denied human rights in the name of conflict-induced national security. Likewise, conflict transformation seemed to be unachievable because of the low level of human rights protection and democracy. In Armenia, we broke this vicious circle. On many occasions, I have been asked to what extent democratic transition of Armenia may bring new opportunities for conflict resolution. Of course, Armenia does not represent the entire region, and thus we cannot refer to the overall change in the region. Thus, let me highlight only the current reality from strictly Armenian perspective. The current Armenian authorities do not derive their legitimacy from the conflict perceptions and do not use conflict to clinch on power, to limit human rights or justify their violations. Our moral commitments to human rights, democracy, and non-violence, which we undertook during Velvet Revolution before the entire Armenian people, cannot be neglected for the people who live in the conflict area. The people of Nagorno-Karabakh are entitled to enjoy their human rights and determine their future as much as their compatriot in the Republic of Armenia or any other people in the world. Armenia has supported democratic aspirations of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh, who most recently elected their local authorities in free and fair elections. Peace cannot come as conspiracy between clans or exclusive elites. We need leadership which are both accountable to their people and can gather strong support for peace in their respective societies. Peace should be about people and for people and can come only through the people. With this in mind, we try to advance Nagorno-Karabakh peace process with the following important steps. First, with my Azerbaijani colleague, we were able to agree on necessity of observing and strengthening ceasefire. Second, we agreed that we need to prepare populations for peace. Third, I unilaterally declared that we should find a peaceful settlement acceptable for people of Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. I made clear that the will of people on all sides matters. Why is it important to ascertain this seemingly obvious idea? Without acknowledging and humanizing all other sides and their needs, it would be difficult to explain the rationale behind any compromise. Indeed, my declaration was unilateral, but in order for it to be acceptable for the Armenian people, it requires exactly the same declaration and approach from Azerbaijan. So far, the leadership of Azerbaijan refrained from committing itself to finding a solution acceptable for all. Instead, we continue hearing explicit or implicit war threats. Azerbaijan also refuses any dialogue with the people of Nagorno-Karabakh and their representatives and try to impede any interaction of people living in the conflict area with the world. Under these circumstances, it should not come as a surprise to Azerbaijan that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh strongly rely on Armenia as the only guarantor of their survival and development. Let us be clear, there will be no more genocidal threat to Armenians specifically in Nagorno-Karabakh. I hope that Azerbaijan will approach the expression of will of the people of Nagorno-Karabakh in the upcoming state elections, not as a threat, but opportunity to engage with newly elected authorities. It is our view that the international community should continue to support the peace efforts on the co-chairmanship of the OSCE Minsk Group, namely France, Russia, and the US, especially by sending clear message on inadmissibility of the use of force. It is important that within the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairmanship, the US, Russia, and France closely cooperate with each other. This is good news both for our region and for the world, as it indicates that great powers are able not merely to compete, but also to cooperate with each other, at least in one particular region of the world. Unfortunately, not all regional players have been showing the same degree of responsibility. Turkey continues to be a source of instability and tension in our region. I can be critical on many issues of domestic and foreign policy, but I should acknowledge that the previous government of Armenia made very strong efforts to establish relations with Turkey both in beginning of the 1990s and in 2008-2009. They agreed to establish diplomatic relations with Turkey without preconditions, despite the difficult and tragic past. However, these efforts remained unappreciated, rejected, and even manipulated by Turkey, who signed but refused to ratify the Zurich Protocols. Today, after 104 years of the Armenian genocide, Turkey continues its hostile policy towards the Armenians by closing its land borders, politically and militarily supporting Azerbaijan against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, and most appallingly, by justifying the Armenian genocide. We are a people of the region, and we have been living here from ancestral times. We survived a genocide, and finally we are building a democratic, peaceful, and viable nation. This is a reality that Turkey should accept by ceasing to be eternal security threat to Armenia and the Armenian people. The equal rights and self-determination of peoples are one of the principles of international law put forward by the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs for the resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. When it comes to this principle, somehow there is a tendency to rightly emphasize self-determination and wrongly to forget about the equal rights of peoples. Peoples who live in one region, side by side, are destined to recognize each other as legitimate equals. This means rejection of any idea of domination, subjunction, or destruction of other people. New forms of dialogue, respect, reconciliation, and equality among people are needed in our region. Culture of dialogue, tolerance, and compromise should prevail over all differences and against all odds in the South Caucasus. Thank you for your attention.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alex Cooley. I will be the moderator for today's question and answer session. I direct the Harriman Institute here at Columbia University. We are on the record and we are being live streamed across the world. So I would encourage you, if you have a question, to please use the microphones on either side, introduce yourself, and then keep your question as brief as possible so that we can include as many as we can in our limited time. I will start the Q&A by asking the Prime Minister about the role of the diaspora in this reform process. Traditionally, of course, the diaspora has always had an important relationship, but what do you see as the previous barriers and challenges to engaging in the diaspora, and what steps have you taken to bring the diaspora into this reform process and state-building vision that you have currently?
Of course, diaspora is a very important factor for democratic reform in Armenia. And you know, before revolution, Armenian government were keen to cooperate with diaspora only on issues connected with Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and Armenian genocide international recognition. But now, for us, it's very important and we are ready to cooperate with diaspora in reforming agenda and making our democracy sustainable and strong institutionally. And so we have many renowned persons, actors in our diaspora, and we hope to involve them into a reform process in our country.
Very good, thank you. So let's take the first question. We'll take them over here, please. Yes, please. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Yervan Melkonyan. I have a question about your plans with the judiciary in Armenia. At least in American constitutional law and most other constitutions, the judiciary is not one that's democratic, like the legislature or executive, and oftentimes it's proven very difficult for any country to try to modify the judiciary through legislative means. And oftentimes people have to resort to constitutional amendments or changes in the Constitution. Do you see any sort of plan forward with regards to that? How do you envision changing the judiciary of Armenia to make it stronger and more robust in the future?
You know, I'm sure that we need to adopt an institutional approach for reforming judiciary in our country. And now, recently, we are going to adopt anti-corruption strategy, and the very tangible part of judiciary reform will be connected with anti-corruption policy in Armenia, because a most important problem and issue in our judiciary system, it is corruption in judiciary system. And it was connected with many factors, and not the least factor is on very low salaries of judges, because and now we have no interests among the high level specialists. Jurists to become judges, and now we have problem with invited new judges into our judiciary system, because they have too low salaries, and in condition when there is no way to take bribes, etc. There is no interest for people become judges. And now it is very complicated process, and now we hope to increase the interest to be judged in Armenia, and we are going to cooperate with our international partners to make the activity of judge more attractive for good specialists. And maybe we will have a need to make amendments in our constitution too. But now, at first, we need to have some reforms in our legislative level. And now, until now, our constitution allows us to do that and move forward.
Շնորհակալություն, պարոն վարչապետ։
Thank you. Let's go to this side. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Lilith Markosyan. Prime Minister Pashinyan, a recent review which was funded by your government and conducted by Earthlink and Advanced Resources Development, or ELARD, concluded that the environmental impact assessment of the Amulsad open pit mine, which you support, was deficient. If this mine is opened, despite the existential threat it poses to Jermuk, its surrounding villages, and Armenia's most important water source, Lake Sevan, the report clearly states that Lydian, the corporation that plans to operate in Amulsad, has underestimated the cost of closing the mine after it has operated and rehabilitating the surrounding area. According to LR's report, Lydian has allotted only 5 years for recovering Amulsad. In comparison, in the United States, according to federal and state laws, regulations call for a minimum of 30 years for monitoring and rehabilitating an open pit mine of this magnitude. Furthermore,
Can we get to the question part of this?
Yeah,
I think we get the judge. Thank you. Yeah.
One other note is that ELARD has said that it will take $70 million to actually rehabilitate the area. And so I would like to know how your government plans on enforcing this and making sure that Lydian, if the mine does open, actually is responsible and invest the $7 million that are needed to recover Amulsad.
You posed a very wide question, but let me to answer very concretely. If you mentioned existential threat for Jermuk, if we will define that there is a real existential threat for Jermuk or for anyone in Armenia and any region or like Sevan, this project will be closed. And a very important state that it is the situation that we is starting from we inherited from previous government, and it is very sensitive situation connected with not only an environmental issue, but also it is connected with Armenian obligations in front of international community, and we need to be very careful in solving this situation, not to damage not only Armenian environment, but Armenian investment environment as well, and Armenian international obligations as well, and Armenia's international image as well. And it isn't a very easy question, and I don't think that it has easy solutions. I believe that easy solutions will damage our country, not only in terms of environment, but in terms of investment, ecosystem, environment, and international image. So my position is that any solution, we must make informed decision on that issue. And it isn't acceptable to make any solution based on only fears, only rumors, only risks. We need to understand this situation truly, and we need to make balanced decision on that.
So does that mean that
I'm sorry, we have to move on to other questions. We can't take two-part questions. Thank you very much. Yes, please. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kelly Badishkanian, and thank you, Prime Minister, for speaking to us today at Columbia. My question actually does dovetail with the previous one, and it's about water. I mean, Armenia clearly has a water problem. My family and I, we were in Tavush this past August, and every village we visited on the border talked about irrigation issues or lack of drinking water. It was clearly pervasive. And I'd mention Lake Sevan looks different than it did a couple of years ago. I've read that there are some risks that it could turn into marshland, like there's an environmental problem. And then when I think about Jarmuk, which we did touch upon, I do worry about a cyanide pit being built so closely to the Arpa River Valley. So it's a more general question about what is your perspective on the environment and that very vital, irreplaceable water resource that Armenia has and is potentially at risk. Thank you.
You know, our government announced that we adopt the concept of eco-Armenia. Eco-Armenia, what does it mean? It means that for us, the protection of environment is very important. But it doesn't mean that we are going to close mining sector in our country. It does mean that we are going to increase the standards of the mining sector in our country. And by the way, in our country we have no problem of water. We have problem of water supply because we have huge water resources in our country, and now we need to have capacities to preserve the water and supply that water to our people in irrigation purposes and for everyday use. We have huge resources, and now it is one of the most important tasks of our government to build new capacities and new infrastructure for effective and efficient use of our country's water resources.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Alec. I'm a student up at the medical center, and I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for coming to speak with us today. So the previous Armenian government was unwilling at the time to condemn Russia's annexation of Crimea at the UN General Assembly, along with only 10 other nations. So I'm wondering if you would be willing to condemn that today.
You know, I think for us it's a very sensitive situation when we are speaking on the conflict between two friendly countries. And you know, I believe that not always any condemnation, etc., they help for solving this problem. Sometimes condemn one side or other side, it disturbs and it increases the tension around the situation. So our goal is to support two partner countries to solve this problem, and we are ready to do our best to support and help Russia and Ukraine to solve conflict, and we are ready to do our best for global peace, security, and stability.
Thank you. And I think we have time for a couple more questions. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Thank you for your speech. So I have a general question about democracy.
Just please introduce yourself.
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my name is Su Wen, and I come from China. So I am a master's student studying computer science at Columbia. So a bit general question about democracy, and I really hope to hear your view on it. So there are some countries, for example, some Western Europe countries or like United States, who has a long history of pursuing the value of democracy. It has been having a democratic political system for a long time. While there are countries, even today, are starting to adopt democracy and still going back and forth between democracy and sometimes came back to an like authoritarian or totalitarian government. So I'm just wondering, in a society today where like information are like widely spread around the world and people mostly recognize the advantage of democracy, why do you think there is such a difference where some countries still adopt democracy with a long history while some countries are still going back and forth? And last but not least, what do you think is the most important factor that these countries can most important factor for these countries to protect the value of freedom, the value of democracy in these countries? Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said, for us, democracy isn't something that was imported from outside, and it is very important nuance for me and for us for perception of democracy. Because, I don't believe that democracy should be exported from somewhere to somewhere. Democracy and freedom should be a choice or no choice for country, for people, etc. The most important nuance of our democratic revolution is that it was choice of Armenian people, and there was no one foreign force involved in our democratic revolution, and that is very important. And I don't think that I can make and I have right and authority to give advice to other countries, build or not build democracy, or be or not to be democratic country, because every country has its own nuances, and it's up to the people, it's up to every people to decide what is the best way for them to go. Maybe I don't know, but I believe and I'm sure, and our people proved that Armenian people is democratic people, because we accepted democracy since the Soviet time. Armenia in the process of even in the process in the situation of existing of Soviet Union in early 1990s, Armenia was democratic country and had a democratically elected government. So I believe that democracy is an Armenian value. It isn't something that we took from outside of our country. It's domestic value, it's national value. Democracy, I believe, it is our mind. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you very much.
Yes, please.
Hi, Baron Pashinyan. My name is Mariam. I am a PhD student in machine learning here at Columbia. And my question to you is about military. So this has been about military. Banak.
Military.
Yes, military, yes. So this was the second year I held a robotics camp with MIT in Armenia, and it was a big hit. And I noticed this interesting trend among young Armenian women who want to serve in the army. And including myself, I would love to serve for the army. And many people don't see it as an obligation, but they see it as a right. So my suggestion to you is the following, and I wonder what you think about it. I would love to be a citizen of the country where both men and women serve, and men don't have to serve for 2 years in that case. Then everyone gets to serve for 1 year, and I believe that would solve a lot of issues about the army, such as people avoiding the service, people hurting themselves on purpose so they're not eligible for service. So that's my suggestion, and I wonder what you think about it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is worthy idea to discuss. And now, actually, this process has already started in Armenia. I mean that every year the number of women serving in army professionally, not like obligation, is increasing. And I believe that this process will develop further, and the next step will be a real discussion about the women obligatory service in army. It is idea that should be discussed, but what would be the outcome of that discussion, now I can't say, because as I said, Armenia is a democratic country, and we need to solve this problem, this issue, through the wide discussion with our society, with our people.
Thank you. And we have time for one more, but very quick, please. Yes.
Thank you for your time. And I'm Jason from School of Engineer and Applied Science, also from China. We know that Armenia is on the Asian Silk Road and also joined the Belt and Road initiatives. And what I want to ask is whether there are any ongoing projects under this initiative. If any, what are they? If not, what do you think are the reasons? And also, what are your recommendations for the foreign investors to invest in your country? Thank you.
To invest our country, you know, I think that Armenia is attractive for foreign investment due to several reasons. First of all, Armenia is a place which is very important to create global connections. I mean, first of all, Armenian diaspora, and secondly, Armenia is a member of Eurasian Economic Union, and it opens the Eurasian Economic Union's market for investors in Armenia, and Armenia has a GSP and GSP plus trade regime with the European Union, with the United States, Switzerland, and Armenia, of course, most importantly, has talented people, talented young generation with a big and strong ambitions and energy. And it is just beautiful country where is very convenient to live.
Thank you. So, Prime Minister Pashinyan, we want to thank you for sharing these thoughts with us, your vision for the country. We want to wish you success with your ambitious reform agenda, and please extend an invitation to you to visit us again in the future. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.